So, how do you flip a classroom? When you look at the definition, it looks very simple. As you may have understood, there is a reversal of practices. What generally happens in the classroom would happen at home, and the kind of homework would happen in the classroom. And it's quite easy for us to ask the question, what is the big deal about it? This is kind of a reversal, isn't it? Now, as always, the devil is in the details. It's easy to talk about flipping a classroom, but it is a bit challenging to deliver a truly flipped experience to the learners. So, I am going to talk about the different stages involved when we flip a classroom. And when we flip a classroom, there are certain measures to be taken, certain strategies to be followed. At the beginning, I will talk about the general things to be taken care of, and then I would go a bit more elaborate and talk about the other stages brick by brick. Without being too specific about it, the one thing we should do at the very beginning is we need to know what material are we going to flip. Which lesson are you going to flip, or which part of a lesson are you going to flip? And that should be very carefully chosen, carefully selected. And you also will have a very serious kind of a reason, a much thought about explanation why you have selected this particular component for the flipping process. And then you also should identify the objectives of the activity. What are your objectives after flipping it, and what do you mean to achieve through the process of flipping the learning? Only if you are clear about the outcome, the objectives, you will be able to design the process of flipping. You will be able to design the activities inside the classroom in such a way that it would lead to the desired result, the expected outcome. And when you design the experience, the learning experience of the students, you have to take extra care that your design is done in such a way that the learning objectives of the material you have selected and the nature and character of the members of the learning community you have, that all these things are taken into consideration. These are some very general kind of matters to be looked into at the very beginning when you think of flipping your classroom. And what I have spoken to you right now regarding things to be taken care of, there are two general kind of things. And now we would look at the various, I'll talk about 9 stages of the flipping process and how we need to go through it. Let me walk you through these 9 stages. Number 1, you need to be clear about the course name and description. We are thinking about preparing a plan for the flip. When you have a full flip plan, there are 9 strategies we go for, and these strategies are actually culled from the different books related to flipping a college classroom. I will mention those references at the end. So, the course name and description should be mentioned first. What kind of a course it is? We call a paper. Here we call it a paper, okay? And describe the nature of it, And afterwards, we talk about the place of that course in the larger program of study. If you have a course called Language for Advertisement in a program called BA Functional English, then you have to mention the nature of the specific course paper and the program of study, and what is the role, what is the place, what is the significance of that particular paper in the whole program of study, all right? And what are the learning goals of the course? At the end of the course, when you finish delivering it, what are the goals involved? What do you plan to achieve? And number 4, you need to have a description of the learner. What kind of a learner, what kind of learners do you have? And what are their levels of learning so far? And where do you plan to take them to at the end of their flipped learning experience? Be clear and specific about it. And afterwards, as I mentioned earlier, the rationale for flipping. Why have you decided to flip a particular lesson or a particular course? Explain it clearly so that you will be able to impress upon someone else if they ask you, why have you decided to do that? All right? And definitely most of us would base our design on certain theories, certain pedagogical principles we'll base it on. So if you are basing your model on a particular theory or a particular kind of a practice, if a theory or such a pedagogical practice is guiding what you are doing, what you are planning to do, then explain that too, all right? Then afterwards, we would come to the structure of the flipped course, followed by preparation of learners. We need to prepare the learner because the learners should be fully aware of what a flipped classroom is, what do you expect from them, and why have you flipped it, and what do you intend to achieve for them through the experience. I'll come to it in detail. Then description of the in-class and out-of-class activities. In a flipped classroom, the pre-recorded lecturing would be delivered to the learner prior to the class, before the class, and that is a pre-class activity. And after that, there will be in-class activity. In-class activity will be the activities you give. It can be individual, group, small group, pair work kind of activity. And there should be a description of what kind of in-class, what kind of out-class activities you will be using, and why do you plan to use those activities. What do you intend to achieve through those activities? Okay. And that should be the explanation of the tools you use in the flipped classroom. It can be about the technology used, can be about the apps you employ, and whatever be the tools you use, you need to explain what are those tools and why are you using those tools. And towards the end, you will have your assessment strategies. How do you plan to assess them? What are the formative assessment and what are the summative assessment plans which you have towards the end of the flipped classroom? In a quick look, these are actually the various stages involved when you prepare the plan for a complete flip. And now we would try to look at each of those components in a more detailed fashion. But before we do that, let me tell you one thing. Communication is very important in a flipped methodology. How clearly, how consistently, and how constantly you communicate with your learner becomes a very, very core necessity in the flipped methodology, because the students should know what should be accomplished before they come to the class, right? And what should they accomplish inside the class and what is expected of them after the class too. So, these in-class objectives and the pre-class objectives should be made quite clear to the learners. And this is why I say communication is key to the success of the flipped strategy in the classroom. Now, I'll come in a more detailed fashion regarding how to flip the classroom, the process of a full flip. The first stage I talked about earlier can be like you have to gain attention of your learners, and this attention grabbing should be done through an online checklist. It could be done through an online checklist. If you're employing some other means, that's okay. And it is advisable for you to plan weekly emails, and through the weekly emails you can preview the week, the whole of the week. You can explain what is to come during the week, and you can even have an overview page. You can also mention, if you have a blog or something, you can have an overview page on it. Even in mail it's possible. A brief introductory paragraph can be added about the topic you are teaching, and you can also describe the assignments and readings due for that week. So the students can get an easy early access to what is to come and how are they to be ready for what is to come, right? And there can also be a link to the checklist to track the students' task completion. And if you're using Moodle or Google Classroom or any such learning management system, I'm sure you know how to work that link out. And you can also tell them regarding the breakup into the pre-class, the in-class and after-class activities, as I said. And if you are successfully chunking it into pre-class, in-class and after-class kind of activities, it would be preparing them for the tasks to come. Now, this in brief is what we should do when we try to gain attention of our learners, and it can be done through an online checklist. And this is where, as I mentioned a moment ago, the significance of getting students oriented to the flipped learning comes in. Because there could be concerns, there could be, there's already criticism from the community of learners who would say that there is an increased workload placed on the students because teacher is not lecturing. So they think that teacher's work has been taken away from their shoulders. And now whatever lecture is there is given online, and they have to use their personal space, personal time to listen to it, and then they have to come. So they think that there is an increased burden, kind of a cognitive overload placed. It's not a cognitive overload, increased burden placed on their shoulders. This is why you need to prepare them by talking about the perceptions of workload. It's necessary to convince the learner why the session is being flipped and what are the final takeaways from it and how are they going to benefit out of it. It would be wonderful if you can clearly illustrate through them how far they fare better when they switch into a flipped mode of learning from the traditional classrooms, right? You need to tell them that their attitude towards learning should change, because now we are pushing them into active learning strategy. And compare that with what is meant by a relevant kind of an educational experience, how they are going to benefit out of it, okay? And please make them aware about the metacognitive skills they develop, because time management, managing themselves, learning to learn. These are all some of the skills they are going to pick through a flipped classroom, because they have to take ownership of their learning process. They need to be more responsible towards themselves, and that sense of responsibility would be clearly reflected in the learning outcome and the enhancement of the skills and capabilities of the learners. So convince them about it, and also check their comfort level with the technology involved, because if the learners are not comfortable with the kind of technology, the sort of tools you use as part of the flipping process, then it will be a lost mission from the beginning. So check their level of comfort with the technology and try to use only those apps, those kinds of technology they are comfortable with. Otherwise, the process would be rendered quite difficult and complex, and the desired outcome would be impossible at the end of the show. The second, as I said, when you inform the students about the objective, it should be made in a very clear fashion. There should not be any confusion regarding what you had on your mind and what actually the students understood. So clear communication about the objectives throughout the learning process. That is why I use the word like constant, consistent communication from the beginning to the very end of the process. And objectives, to remind the learner about the objectives could be embedded in different stages of the learning process. At multiple places you can mention the objectives so that they wouldn't lose track of where they are heading. And then you have to stimulate the recall of prior learning. There's a clear constructivist process involved in the flipped classroom methodology. You have to stimulate the recall of prior learning. For instance, when they come to the classroom for in-class activities, after the pre-class process of listening to the pre-recorded lecture delivered by the teacher, first the teacher will check whether they have listened to the lecture. It can happen in the form of a quiz or something. Then a more applied kind of activities will be done afterwards. So we need to have certain strategies to activate the background knowledge, to connect them to the prior knowledge, and to draw from the lecture they have listened to at home, to draw from what they have learned from that lecture, and to apply what they have drawn, what they have understood from the lecture into the process. This becomes necessary, otherwise the flipped mission, as I said, can lose its way somewhere. As I said, there are two phases involved: the pre-recorded lecture component, and it need not be always a lecture component. It can even be a reading material. It can be a text which you give to them. But because your learners, the millennials, are more strongly connected to audio and video kind of modes, it is advisable that if possible you go for the video mode. You can always check their comfort level. Some of them would be comfortable with the audio and some would be more interested in the video. It's always advisable, if possible, please deliver it in the way they would like it to be delivered. Audio for those who would prefer audio kind of a format. And you should also check up on certain formats you can use, like multiple choice questions, discussion boards, short questions, analysis based activities. All these should be involved in the in-class component for the activity. And whatever they have picked from the lecture should be reinforced through the activities which we plan in the classroom. And that is when you will have a smooth alignment of the pre-class and the in-class objectives. That's when that alignment becomes really possible. Otherwise, there could be a disconnect between the lecture you have given and the activities and the assignments which you run inside the classroom. And you have to provide learning guidance. As I said, if you remove the lecture from the classroom and when you deliver the lecture in a pre-recorded format to the learner, then you are freeing up lots of personal learning space inside the classroom. So when you have the face-to-face in-class sessions go on, there is so much room for providing guidance to them. So we will have some checkup activities when they come, the pre-class checkup activities, and there could be visualization activities, there could be role playing, lots of such TPS kind of activities become possible in the classroom. And all these activities are opportunities for the teacher to guide them to where they should reach according to the objectives you have planned. And we have to elicit performance from them, which is the next important thing. And this stage marks a big difference between what happens in a traditional classroom and what happens in a flipped classroom. We have to elicit a performance. We should make them practice, we should make them apply what they have apparently learned. And in this direction, we have to involve our students in many practice-based activities. Try to give them practice-based activities, activities in which they are made to draw from the lecture they have listened to and give that as an input into the activities they perform. There can be even scenario-based. You provide them a particular scenario and ask them to find a solution to it. And to find a solution, they will have to apply a concept. To apply the concept, they should have understood the concept. And to understand the concept, they should have listened to the pre-recorded lecture you have delivered online to them. This is how the linkage works, right? And you can also make them indulge in reflective writing or sharing what they have learned. Orally sharing or reflective writing is also suggested so that it will elicit practical performance from them. And the next is giving feedback to them. Provide them feedback. Feedback is quite a core necessity in the flipped classroom, because in the whole flipping process, you should have designed certain junctures, certain locations where you can fit in opportunities for feedback. And it should be fit into the face-to-face sessions you organize after they have listened to the pre-recorded lecture at home. And consistent, because consistent feedback on the part of the instructor becomes necessary. And consistent, not only the instructor feedback, there could be also peer feedback. Other members in the group, other members in the team, they also can provide feedback to them. This is possible because the learner connection, learner content connection, and learner instructor connection, all the three kinds of connections would be strengthened in the process. So when you indulge in a group activity, they get feedback from their batchmates, group mates, also their peers. Then it comes to assessment. Now, assessment, summative assessment perhaps can remain the same, because if your idea is to have grades, and if you think that grades will reflect whatever you have learned in the classroom, in the campus, then you may not really require something called flipped classroom. because flipped classroom hugely contributes to certain other realms which are not assessed when you go for a traditional grade oriented assessment. Flipped classroom tries to give more stress on the formative assessments, and we should stitch in different kinds of formative assessment to different parts of the flipped learning classroom. It should be varied. You need a variety of them. It should be innovative. You don't have to go for the very traditional kind of tools of assessment, and you need assessments more in number. So the number should be more, and it should be innovative, and it should have variety. And the more formative assessments you can build in different forms into a flipped classroom strategy, it would be more productive when you look at the final outcome. There should be retention and transfer of knowledge. And we also should look at how can we enhance retention and transfer knowledge. What you have learned as part of a theory will never suffice if you are unable to apply that into an actual context. Otherwise, the theory would remain as theory, and it would not be of any practical use in the future. So whatever knowledge is internalized by the person, that internalized knowledge should be transferred to a workplace setting, or they should be able to transfer that knowledge or that skill into a workplace requirement. They should be able to transfer that knowledge they have internalized into the next level of classroom, into the future programs they learn. That should be made possible through the flipped classroom. And that is why we should allow multiple exposures of the concept in the course, exposure to different contexts, and give them room for applying that into different contexts, so that there will be deeper engagement on the part of the learner, and there will be deeper understanding of the topics which are provided. And these are actually the various stages involved when you go for designing, when you prepare the plan for a full flip of your classroom. Thank you.